All right, this is Wise Words, Chapter 7. Wise Words, again, book we've been reading by Peter Leithert, illustrated by Tony Wall. I haven't been showing you all the illustrations, but they're really solid for each story. This is called The Magical Walnut. Once upon a time, a poor woodsman lived in the middle of a forest, on the same piece of land where his father and grandfather had lived. The woodsman worked very hard, but he remained poor because other people cheated him. He would spend half a day cutting down a tree, the other half dragging it through the forest to the sawmill. But the greedy owner of the sawmill only gave him a few coins for his labors. But the woodsman never complained or asked for more. Instead, he was happy and content. He had a roof over his head, which he had made himself. Even though he was poor, there always turned out to be just enough of everything to go around. Every morning at sunrise, he kissed his wife and children before he went off into the forest singing in a glad voice. At dark, he would come home whistling. One day, as the woodsman was getting ready to cut down a tree, a voice called to him from the treetop. He looked up to see a squirrel hunched on a high branch. Did you say something?" the woodsman asked. I said, "Please do not cut down my tree," the squirrel answered. "I have lived here all my life. My grandfather lived in this tree when it was little more than a sapling. My children will live here when I die. Please do not take away our home." "I'm sorry," the woodsman answered, "but I have a family too. I must feed and clothe them. I'm a woodsman. I make my living by cutting down trees and selling them to the sawmill. If I do not cut down trees, I will not be able to take care of my family." "Sir, but there are many other trees in the forest," the squirrel answered. "Yes, but this is one of the best, as you well know." The squirrel shook his tail for a moment. "Sir, I will make a deal with you." "What kind of deal can you make?" the woodsman laughed. "If you promise not to cut down my tree, I will tell you an amazing secret. I promise you, this secret is worth more than any tree, much, much more." The woodsman ran his hand over the bark of the tree. It was a solid tree. It might bring him good money at the sawmill, but it's not every day that a squirrel was willing to tell secrets. Perhaps the squirrel did have something very, very important to tell him. Besides, the woodsman liked the squirrel and felt sorry for him. Squirrels are often rude, he thought. Very few call anyone sir or say please nowadays. This is perhaps the most polite squirrel I've ever met. With that, the woodsman made his decision. "Fine, I will not cut down your tree. May your children's children live in it. Now tell me your secret." "Do you see that young walnut tree there?" the squirrel asked, pointing his tail. "Go shake the trunk. You must shake it gently and see what happens." The woodsman shook the young walnut tree as gently as he could. He was expecting a shower of gold or diamonds, but only a single nut fell at his feet. He looked at the squirrel. "Is that all, a walnut? I can get plenty of walnuts from other trees. Trust me," said the squirrel. "The walnuts from this tree are special." The woodsman was greatly disappointed. He had traded a tall, strong tree for a walnut. He was beginning to think that the squirrel was only pretending to be polite. Perhaps all the rumors about squirrels being dishonest creatures were true after all, but a promise was a promise. He would not cut down the squirrel's tree. Without picking up the nut, he turned to go. "Sir, do not forget your walnut," the squirrel called after him. The woodsman picked up the nut, thrust it into his pocket, and walked off to find another tree to cut down. "There are plenty more," the squirrel said, "but take only one at a time. Only one." Then he disappeared in the top branches of the tree. By the time the woodsman arrived at home that night, he'd forgotten about the walnut. After dinner, he read a book to his children, prayed with them, and tucked them into bed. As he undressed, he felt a lump in his pocket, remembered the squirrel and the walnut. He took out the nut and examined it under a lamp. It was an ordinary-looking walnut, slightly green. Without another thought, he put it on the sill of the window, turned out the lamp, and rolled into bed. When all was quiet, the woodsman and his family were fast asleep. The walnut began to shake. Then it rolled in a circle, faster and faster, and finally, when it was spinning like a top, the shell popped open, and a small fairy leaped out and looked around. With a flutter of her wings, for she was a girl fairy, the fairy darted into the kitchen and began to work as quietly as a kitten. All that night, the fairy worked in the house and the garden. She cleaned where the woodsman's wife had not had time to clean. She touched the bowl of fruit on the table, and the fruit doubled in size. When she flew through the garden, the beans and cabbages became larger and greener. As morning approached, she climbed back to the walnut and the fairy both vanished. When the woodsman and his wife awakened in the morning, they found their house clean, the fruit basket full, and the garden flourishing. They were overjoyed at their good fortune, more than a little puzzled that the garden had grown so much overnight. They could not explain what had happened, but gave special thanks over their breakfast. The woodsman never noticed the walnut was gone from the sill. Every morning, for a week, the woodsman and his wife awoke to find the house clean. The vegetables in the garden continued to grow and grow, and the woodsman's wife picked some of the best cabbages and sold them in the village square. The woodsman did not think about the walnut again until he passed the squirrel's tree some time later. Seeing him walk by, the squirrel called, "Sir, are things well?" Yes, very well," the woodsman said, thinking again how polite the squirrel was. "Didn't I tell you?" "You mean it was the walnut that brought us such blessing?" The squirrel seemed to smile, but then shook his tail and scampered away. Before he disappeared into the higher branches, he called back, "You need to get another one every week, just one." And the woodsman was not quite sure the squirrel was telling the truth, but what could it hurt? He went to the walnut tree and shook it gently. After the walnut dropped at his feet, when he got home at night, he put it on the windowsill. The next morning, everything was clean and shining. The vegetables in the garden were even larger and better than they had been last time. When the woodsman looked at the windowsill, he noticed the walnut was gone. And so it went week after week. Every week, the woodsman went to the walnut tree, shook it gently, and took a single walnut to place on his windowsill. His wife sold the vegetables in town, and the woodsman was able to save some coins, which he carefully hid behind a loose brick on the hearth. One day, the sawmill's owner's son was walking through the forest when he heard the voice on the other side of the bush. Creeping closer, he saw the woodsman talking to the squirrel. "The walnuts are bringing me blessings of every kind," the woodsman was saying. "Every one of the fairies has worked very hard. How can I ever thank you?" "Sir, you have already paid me back by being kind enough not to cut down my tree," the squirrel answered. The sawmill's owner's son had noticed the woodsman and his family looked fatter than ever before. He'd eaten some of the cabbages and potatoes from the woodsman's garden, and he thought they were the very best he'd ever tasted. Now he knew the secret of the woodsman's sudden prosperity. He watched as the woodsman shook the tree and picked up a walnut, and then hurried back to tell his father. After hearing about the magical walnut tree, the greedy sawmill owner smiled slyly and scratched his chin. He was thinking how rich he would be if he could get fairies to work for him. "I shall talk to the woodsman," he said to himself. "For the right price, he will sell us the land where the magical walnut tree grows." That evening, the sawmill owner visited the woodsman. "You have struggled for many years to feed your family, haven't you, my friend?" He began with a smile that was a little too big. When the woodsman nodded, he continued, "I want to make a deal with you. I want to buy your land. With the money I pay you, you will never have to worry again about caring for your family." "Oh, no," said the woodsman. "This land belonged to my father and my grandfather. It belonged to my children after me. I could never sell this land. I have everything I could possibly want here. I am happy, and life is good for us." The sawmill owner argued with the woodsman for a long time. He offered more and more money. Still, the woodsman refused to sell his land, and finally the sawmill owner left in a whirlwind of anger. For days, the owner of the sawmill could think of nothing but the woodsman's small forest and its magical walnut tree. He wanted it so badly he could not eat or drink. When his wife discovered what was troubling him, she said, "Why don't you just go take some walnuts? Go to the forest tonight and bring home a big basketful, and stop feeling sorry for yourself. You're an important man. Don't let that little woodsman stand in your way." So that very night, the sawmill owner and his son stole into the woodman's forest to gather some walnuts. When they found the walnut tree in the darkness, they both grabbed hold and shook it with all their might. Walnuts by the dozens rained to the ground. They shook and shook until no more walnuts fell. They gathered them into baskets and hurried home. The owner's wife was already in bed when they returned. They made so much noise laughing and congratulating each other about their success that she nearly threw a chair at them. When they had carried the basket inside, they excitedly spread the walnuts on the kitchen floor. They sat down to see what would happen. They waited and waited, but nothing happened. Finally, they became bored and went to bed. Now, as you can see, the sawmill owner and his son were both ignorant of the ways of fairies. The 28th edition of the Encyclopedia of Fairies, Volume 12, page 536, states clearly that fairies will not come out of walnut shells so long as there are people around. Now, acorns are an entirely different story, as everyone knows. As soon as people are in bed, though, fairies burst out of walnuts like popcorn. No sooner had the sawmill owner and his son fallen asleep than the walnuts began to shake and spin and open. Dozens of fairies flew out into the quiet house. Perhaps you noticed something about children. Well, it's not terribly difficult to get one child to do housework. It is very hard to get several children to do housework at the same time. Children begin washing dishes or making beds, and before long they're splashing water on each other or having a pillow fight. Now, most authorities will tell you that fairies are a lot like children. One or two fairies are a lot of help around the house. When you get a few, especially when you get dozens and dozens, they start to act silly and play instead of working. And fairies can play rough, as you well know. That is why the sawmill owner, his wife, and his sons were awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of clanging pots, splintering wood, and shattering glass. In horror, they rushed to the kitchens to find fairies flitting here and there, smashing chairs against the wall, playing sword fight with the kitchen utensils, and tossing the best dishes through the windows. Frantically, the sawmill owner ran through the kitchen, chasing the fairies this way and that. Of course, he did not catch them. When was the last time you caught a fairy? When one of the fairies saw that he was being chased, he sped into the dining room, while several others scooted a chair to the doorway. Before he knew what had happened, the sawmill owner had tripped over the chair and was flying toward the dining room table. He landed with a tremendous crash. After he struggled to his feet, the fairies began to chase him. Normally, fairies are afraid of people, which is why you and I do not see them very often. But when they get in a group of them together, when they have begun to have some fun, they get bolder. And these fairies were having so much fun, they'd become so bold that one flew up to pull the sawmill owner's hair. Another tripped him as he stumbled backward. Another pulled at his nightshirt. To make matters worse, some of the fairies escaped through the broken windows and were making havoc of the sawmill. Through the night, one could hear crashing and banging as the sawmill was taken apart piece by piece. When morning came, the whole town gathered at the sawmill to survey the damage. Everything was destroyed. The sawmill owner told everyone that a pack of wild dogs had gotten loose in his house. No one believed that story, so he said it was really a herd of cattle that had strayed from their farm. And when no one believed that, he just stopped trying to explain what had happened. Later that day, the woodsman visited the sawmill owner. "Well, I have a deal for you," he said. "I have saved some money from selling vegetables in town. I would like to buy your sawmill and house from you. I have saved enough to fix them so they'll be as good as new." Since the sawmill owner had lost everything, and since his home insurance had no provisions for damage done by fairies, he could do nothing but agree. So the woodsman bought the sawmill and repaired it. Before long, the woodsmen were bringing trees from miles away because he always paid them a fair price. He worked hard and lived prosperously and happily for the rest of his life. And though he never again needed a magical walnut, the woodsman always made sure that the polite squirrel's tree was not cut down. The moral. Proverbs 13, verse 11. Dishonest money dwindles away, but he who gathers money little by little makes it grow. All right. There's the story for today. You can catch another one tomorrow.